Careers in chemistry. Chemistry doesn't just live in a lab. It shapes the medicine we take, the food we eat, and even crime scene investigations. There are many different careers in chemistry, but the ones we'll cover today are medicinal chemists, toxicologists, forensic chemists, biochemists, and food and flavor chemists. Let's begin with medicinal or pharmaceutical chemists. So, medicinal chemists work in pharmaceutical industry to design and create chemical compounds that can be used as drugs. Their main goal is to develop molecules that have a specific effect on the body, either by discovering new synthetic drugs or improving existing ones to make them work better or be delivered more effectively. What's really interesting is how collaborative their work is. Chemists work alongside with biologists to test new compounds and with toxicologists and pharmacologists to make their drugs safer. To get into the field, you typically need at least a bachelor's degree in pharmaceutical or organic chemistry, but most jobs prefer a master's or PhD. The average salary for chemists is about $79,000, and the job outlook is steady, with around 6% growth expected. Important skills include teamwork, research, communication, data analysis, and problem solving. Day to day, medicinal chemists are running experiments, analyzing data, and working with teams to make drugs safer, more effective, and easier to deliver. Now, the chemistry part is really where it all comes together. We've learned in class about acids and bases, and that's foundational here. One key concept chemists use is pKa, which tells us how acidic or basic a compound is, and whether it's charged or neutral at a certain pH. This matters because drugs dissolve well in water, but neutral drugs cross cell membranes more easily. A great example is ibuprofen. It has a pKa around 4 in the stomach. In the stomach, where the pH is about 2, it's pronated and neutral, so it can pass through the stomach lining. Once it's in the blood, which has a pH of around 7.4, it becomes depronated and negatively charged, making it more soluble in blood but less able to cross membranes. Medicinal chemists have to predict how a drug will behave in different parts of the body, thinking about absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, or what we call ADME. So even something as simple as acid-base chemistry plays a huge role in designing drugs that actually work. And that's an overview of medicinal chemistry. Next, we'll hear about toxicology.
Now that we've learned about what a medicinal chemist does, let's talk about toxicology. Toxicology is the study of adverse effects on living things. So that can be humans, animals, or anything in your environment. A toxicologist will be finding a lot of molecular weights, pKa values, seeing how strong an acid is, and finding concentrations of things like toxins. Once you gather all your findings, you'll make a graph for your results like we did in lab. The salary for a toxicologist will be around $80,000 a year. An example of toxicology would be a case study on effects of diesel exhaust, which is a book written by Raymond Yang, and they tested the inflammatory rates and tumor levels in rats. Here we have their results in the graph. The left graph is showing you how inflammation levels in the rat's lungs got higher as the month of exposure to diesel gas exhaust continued. The graph on the right shows us how tumors in the rat's lungs also got higher as exposure got longer. But the female rats did have a much higher tumor number, which is interesting. So now that you have found out what a toxicologist does, Savannah will tell you all about forensic chemistry.
Forensic chemists typically make around $65,000 a year, and the required education is either a bachelor's or master's degree, depending on what kind of job you have exactly. Typically, forensic chemists work alongside police and fire departments to help with investigations and are often called to give expert testimony in court. They can help investigate fires by determining if any accelerants are used and finding the exact source of the fire. They can also look at charred debris and determine the chemical makeup to figure out what exactly it was. Another important aspect of forensic chemistry is fingerprinting for crime scenes. They can use chemicals to reveal latent fingerprints, which are invisible to the naked eye. One chemical used is ninhydrin, which reacts with the amino acids in the oils you leave behind in your fingerprints, and it turns the fingerprints from invisible to a bright purple color, which is called Ruhmann's purple. This reaction does happen eventually at room temperature, but typically heat is used to speed up the process and get a clearer result. Like in the reaction rates lab, the reaction in the heated environment had an increased reaction rate compared to that of the room temperature reaction. Now that you've learned about forensic chemistry, let's look at biochemistry.
Career I chose is biochemist. A biochemist studies chemical processes that make life possible between cell energy and how enzymes break down food. And they research a lot of different topics, including cell development and growth to heredity and disease. And they'll apply this knowledge into fields like medicine, genetics, and drug development, often working in labs to analyze and synthesize molecules like proteins, fats, and DNA. And so they'll use this to create new medications or analyze DNA or other biological processes. And they do all of this using chemistry. Biochemistry is a pretty fast-growing field. The average biochemist earns around 103,000 per year, and it's expected to grow about 7% the next decade, which is faster than most careers. And for this job, you need a bachelor's degree in biochemistry or a related field such as physical sciences or biology to get started. But for advanced research positions, you do need a PhD, and that can open up a lot of other opportunities. So biochemistry does depend heavily on thermodynamics to explain how energy moves through our cells. So the Gibbs free energy equation tells us whether a reaction will occur spontaneously or not. So for example, ATP hydrolysis has a negative delta G, so it releases energy that powers muscle movements and cell functions. But equilibrium is also really important because we can use that to calculate how reactions balance out in processes like glycolysis. And then both laws of thermodynamics. So the first law says that energy can't be created and destroyed. And so that's what happens when we convert food into ATP. And the second law explains how systems tend towards disorder. And so that's why digestion and other processes are driven forward. And they increase entropy while still keeping us alive and functioning.
Now let's talk a bit about food and flavor chemistry. Food and flavor chemistry depends a lot on the principles of math and chemistry, with a lot of experiments needed to find just the correct amount of each chemical to produce a certain aroma or essence. This requires a lot of knowledge of chemical formulas and the different kinds of reactions and ability to calculate amounts of particles up to parts per billion. As far as education is concerned, flavor chemists preferably should have a bachelor's degree, and further they should have worked 5 years in the flavor development labs. And after these 5 years, they need to pass an examination conducted by the Society of Flavor Chemists. And after these 5 years, they're supervised for 2 years as junior flavorists before taking an oral exam. So in total, it would be 7 years of study after you obtain your bachelor's degree. This is a high-paying job as the salaries exceed the $54,960 amount per annum, which is the median for regular chemists. Some of the advanced chemistry concepts and techniques used in food and flavor chemistry involve gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. WRRC flavor chemistry research uses these techniques in tandem to ensure food safety. So gas chromatography was a technique which made use of a system of separators and concentrators to generate essence. This used physical processes such as evaporation and distillation. Furthermore, this technique enabled the separation of samples, while the components that were separated were analyzed using mass spectrometry. So this allowed for the identification of volatile chemical compounds and major aromas of oranges, rice, and bell peppers. Chemistry is undoubtedly fascinating. The fields covered in this presentation are just a snippet, a small preview of this vast universal science. Really, any career in chemistry can lead to a fulfilling life, giving each and every budding chemist the satisfaction of creating real impact.